From the studios of Warren Tech North, this is Building Bright Futures, a Jeffco podcast with Jeffco Superintendent Dan McMinimee.
I'm Dan McMinimee, and welcome to the latest episode of Building Bright Futures, in which we continue to explore some of the great things going on in Jeffco Public Schools. Joining me today is Chris Lee, Director of Detention and Truancy at Jeffco Public Schools and the Principal of Mount View Youth Services Center. Welcome to the program, Chris.
Thank you for having me.
Mount View Youth Service Center is unlike any other school in Jeffco Public Schools. Can you tell us a little bit about the background and mission of Mount View?
Mount View actually started as a girls' school back in the 1800s, and then it kind of evolved, over the course of property and everything else into what it is today, which is it is a school that's part of DYC. The actual facility is a Division of Youth Corrections. It has a detained school, which is run by Jeffco Public Schools, and then it has a committed school, which is run by the state. And those are kids that have actually been committed to the state system, which means that they don't have an opportunity to get the general public education model that we have as a public school district. So really the vision of Mount View is to take a troubled kid and to really try to give them some education, some intervention aspects, some resources, and some techniques to where they can help themselves get out of some of the situations that they're in. And it varies. It can be, personal with family. It can be drugs. It can be gang related. It could be just simple petty theft. There's a wide range of things that Mount View tries to help with giving skills, so where they start to learn that just because they made a mistake once doesn't mean you have to do it again. And so really it's about giving them the education so where they gain that knowledge base and the understanding that it's okay to mess up as long as you learn from it and you move forward so where you don't make the same mistakes again.
So really it's probably more of a focus on not only academics, but also more of the social emotional things and giving them coping skills and ways to be successful once they step away from Mount View.
Correct. There's aspects of it that we have been able to incorporate just of this year. We were able to get a school social worker to be able to come on site. We have a special education teacher, so we do all of those typical things that you would normally see in a school district. On the flip side of the Mount View pod staff side, there's therapeutic aspects that go into it. There's group meetings. They meet with psychologists and so on. And so there's really a multifaceted aspect to it of when a kid is actually on site. And so hopefully those resources and that knowledge can progress forward and stay with them as they move forward.
Interesting. So speaking of interesting, I know you have a very interesting background. And would you tell us a little bit about yourself and, how did you get to be the principal at Mount View?
Sure. So I'm not I do have a different background than what I would think a normal educator would, as if you're looking at it from traditional lens. I didn't go straight from high school into college into teaching. I actually am a mason by trade. I started my masonry apprenticeship when I was 16, when you could at that time. Mm-hmm. I've had my own masonry company. I actually went into the Marine Corps after high school, and then when I got out, I finished up my masonry apprenticeship, and then started at Metro State before it became the university. Mm-hmm. So when it was still the college, and I went to school at night while I was doing masonry. Got my bachelor's in human performance and sport. I taught PE and health, coached baseball for many years. Then I started a masonry program with a charter school in Denver Public Schools, which is actually part of DYC for troubled kids. It's actually called Rite of Passage Review Academy, which is actually a school to where Mount View students can actually go to, can be actually placed into. So I was there, started the masonry program, got my master's degree in administration and supervision, and then I started my doctoral program and got my doctorate in educational leadership. And so as I've progressed through my educational career, I've always had many different things going on. I was teaching, coaching, and running my masonry company all at the same time.
Wow.
Then I got to a point where I needed to decide, do I want to go with my education or do I want to stay with masonry? And I decided that education was a bit more important to me. So I decided to, a few years ago, close my masonry company and focus solely on education. And as I went through teaching and everything, I realized that for me personally, that there was many other ways that you could reach students in a positive way, especially ones that we consider at risk, ones that have gone down a line where most people in society says is bad, but really they got off track someplace. And so I figured that if I got into administration, I could use some of my knowledge, my background, and my varied skills to kind of help maybe mold that conversation a little bit to where we don't forget about those kids, and that really most of them, they're really not bad kids or bad people. It's just certain things happened and they went with it and got caught, got in trouble. And so in our way at Mount View, for me, we try to help them get out of that mold and try to get them to realize that you don't have to be one particular stereotypical person in order to achieve certain things. And I think I'm a perfect example of that because of my background. It's just,
and I was going to say that too. I think that your background is perfect for the work that you currently do. I mean, you clearly have a lot of great experiences in a lot of different arenas. Can you talk about and connect a couple of those experiences that you've had, be it being in the business world, be it being a U.S. Marine? How do those help you do the job you do now? And what do you think is the greatest experience you've had outside of education that comes to bear on education in your everyday work?
For me, probably one of the best decisions I ever made was going into the Marine Corps. I went in, and the Marine Corps really does break you down and gives you an ability to build yourself back up in a much more positive sense. And what I mean by that is not only does it do the physical, but it does the emotional, and it helps you understand that leadership is a multifaceted piece. It's not just one person standing in front of somebody and directing them saying, hey, go do this. That it's really a collaborative effort of a bunch of people with expertise in certain areas that look at what the mission is, and then they figure out a plan of how to accomplish that, with knowing that there's adaptability and flexibility that you need to have. You could have the best laid plan out there, doesn't mean it's going to work. So if it doesn't work, what are you going to do? You have to be able to think on your feet. You have to be able to adapt and overcome those situations. And a phrase I use all the time is, adapting and overcoming. And that's one of the Marine Corps mottos. It really lends itself to, there's not just one way to do something. There's not a right way, and there's not necessarily a wrong way. Are there best practices? Absolutely. Are there things that work all the time? No. Does everything work all the time? No. So if everything isn't working all the time, what is it that you need to do? Well, you need to figure out how to make it work. And then the next piece to that would be the masonry aspect of it. Because in masonry, it is not, a lot of people, I think, look at it and say, oh, it's just brick or block or stone. That's kind of a facade, and it's easy to put up. Well, there's a lot of different things that go into it, because if you build it wrong, it's going to fail. It's going to fall. You have to work with electricians, you have to work with plumbers and carpenters and everything to make sure that the foundation people to make sure that it's sturdy enough to be able to hold the weight in order to support something that's going to last for a while. And so when you take the concept of the Marine Corps and the small unit leadership, and you take the concept of masonry and how you build upon one to another, and if you do it certain ways, it's going to fail, other ways it's not, and you combine those two, and then you look at education. I look at education as those two pieces combined. There's not a right way, there's not a wrong way, there's many different perspectives on it, but you have to look at it from your perspective and what your position is, what your mission and vision of that school is, and the type of kids and also the staff that you have. And you have to work with them in order to give them the freedom to be able to go out and make some of their own decisions stuff, but still be able to have a firm enough grasp on it to where, yes, there are some non-negotiables, but there are those other pieces where, you guide them. how else can we get there without necessarily doing it the way that we've always done it? While that works sometimes, not all the time. So I think those components for me really are the connecting point for education, and where I think that adaptability and overcoming comes into play.
That's a great answer. We're going to take a quick break, and then we'll return with Dr. Chris Lee, the principal of Mount View Youth Services Center. You're listening to Building Bright Futures podcast.
Hi, this is Jim Baker, Director of Employment Services for Jeffco Public Schools. With over 155 schools and 5,000 licensed employees, we are looking for the best of the best and the brightest of the brightest to join our team. Visit www.jeffcopublicschools.org and click on the Jobs at Jeffco link for more information and apply today.
Welcome back. You're listening to Building Bright Futures podcast. I'm Dan McMinimee, Superintendent of Jeffco Public Schools, and today I'm joined by Principal Chris Lee, the Principal of Mount View Youth Service Center and the Director of Detention and Truancy for Jeffco Public Schools. Previously talked a little bit about his background, very excellent background, and then talked a little bit about the mission of Mount View Youth Service Center. I want to jump in a little bit deeper on the structure of the school and, what is a typical length of stay for students at your unique school. Tell us a little bit more about the structure.
So Mount View Detained School has a cap of 39 kids. The typical stay currently is about 10 days, roughly. We could have kids that are there for literally just a couple hours up to, we just had a student that left that was there almost 2.5 years. And so there's a lot of factors that determine whether or not a student is going to be there for an extended stay or for a short period of time. And that can be court orders, it could be a PO, it could be placement, it could be educational opportunities, it could be whether or not a parent's going to bond them out, whether or not whatever they did in order to get to Mount View is connected to another case or somebody else, and the DA can say, we need to keep this kid here for a little bit longer. So there's a lot of different factors that go into that. And so our structure is we do the 4 cores. We do math, English language arts, science, and social studies. And then we do a life skills class at the end of the day. And I actually have that scheduled a little bit longer because there's those key components that the kids need to know and understand in order to be able to connect everything else when they leave Mount View. We're not just about the education piece, but how do you connect that to your life? How do you connect that to where you can be successful, but education is that foundation, and where education can actually be important to you instead of just this hindrance or it's getting in the way of your fun time or whatever the perspective is. And we work closely with the Mount View day team security staff, and really what it is, it's the Mount View staff that's employed by the Division of Youth Corrections that maintain that discipline, if you will, the safety. So there are certain places in the halls and things like that where they're stationed. They're the ones that if a student is unruly, out of control, gets physical, they're the ones that handle and maintain that. And they're the ones that make sure that any kind of transport to and from school, to and from medical, to and from court occurs according to all policies and everything that are set by not only the site but also by DYC.
So really, you're serving two masters. You're serving the Colorado Department of Education through the educational program and the Department of Youth Services in terms of detention and working with students with some pretty restrictive environments. How do you balance those two things?
That's actually a very interesting question. We really started last year to look at how things in the classroom were working. And one of my first days there, it was 7 kids going into a classroom, and within 10 minutes, all 7 of them were out because of some sort of behavior thing. And it was like, whoa, what is that? How does that work? And so it was really looking at what were the policies of the Mount View staff and what was the policies for the Jeffco Detained School. And really it came down to getting to the understanding that education is education. We are there to teach. We are there to educate. We are there to be that facilitator of knowledge and experience where kids can maybe hopefully grasp on something and then move forward with a spark, in their brain and in their belly to say, I don't want to do this criminal activity stuff, but I actually like science or actually like math. And so we've worked really closely with the Mountain View staff to really get an understanding for them as to how classrooms work. That in the classroom, it's really the teacher that's in charge. It's not somebody else that's standing outside the door. They're not the ones that are controlled that time. It's really during education time, during class time, it's education. It's not the other stuff. Mm-hmm. And also getting the kids to understand that that's what it's about too. That once you enter that, cross that threshold into the classroom, you leave all of your other stuff behind. You're here to learn. You're not here to talk about why you're here, what happened last night on the pod, or this kid got in a fight, or none of that stuff happens in there. At least it's not supposed to. I mean, you can't control everything. Yeah. But it's really trying to manage that line and making sure everybody's on the same page and working closely and collaborating and then those lines of communication and then taking what the teachers are saying and what the Mountain View staff are saying and trying to figure out what's actually in the best interest of the kids. Not necessarily what's in the best interest of me, but what's in the best interest of the kid.
So I would like to transition into the type of teacher, because I think that's a really interesting aspect too. I mean, we both went to a lot of school where they talked about evaluations and, what are some successful traits of teachers and what do they look like. But that was more geared toward the traditional environment that we're all used to, a classroom setting at a neighborhood elementary school. How does that change for you and for your teachers? What kind of things do you look for in teachers? And then how do you know when you have that great teacher in a classroom?
A big piece is patience. And a big piece is understanding that even though this kid sitting in front of you did something wrong, they're still a kid. They are still there to learn. And that you provide them the respect, and hopefully in return they will provide you with that respect, and that you actually have to earn it. It's not something that is just given to you. These kids, a lot of them have grown up where there really hasn't been a respect structure in the normal sense. It's been something alternative. And so their perception of respect and everything is a lot different than yours and mine from a traditional standpoint. So it's that component, but then also, are you able to adapt? If something's not going right in the classroom, what do you do? Do you just keep pushing forward and thinking that, I'll get through this next 5 minutes and then I'll be okay for the rest of the class? In this setting, it doesn't work that way. If you're already at that point, you need to figure out, what do I do next to keep that engagement, to get that learning going to where I don't have a behavior problem. And really, it's looking at what are some of those best practices. Kids will learn if they want to learn, right? We look at and use Ross Green, just like Connections Learning Center does. We really look at that. What type of conversations are you having? What's your interaction with the kids? And if the teacher is unable to manage those types of conversations, that's a concern. But the teachers currently that are working at Mountain View in the detained school, they have been able to incorporate a lot of those aspects into just the day-to-day interactions within the classroom, to where our behaviors are at the lowest that they've been as far as teachers actually having to send kids out of the class. We really do a lot of intervention type stuff in the classroom, where it's true classroom management. It's not just, you smarted off to me, you're out of the class. It's not that. There's many different facets that go into it before a kid can ever even leave the classroom. So,
well, I do think it points to, in the most extreme conditions, what are the things that make education possible? And, I heard you say patience, adaptability, developing climate and culture. I mean, those are the things that we would want all of our teachers to exhibit those. Obviously, yours have to do it in a situation where if they're not, it probably becomes really apparent really quick that they're not doing that. So thank you for sharing that. That was really interesting. Listeners to this podcast may have seen our JPS story, Second of School Chances, on our official YouTube page. In that video, you touch on never giving up on students. What do you mean by that?
I don't really know of anybody in society that has not done something to where they haven't been given a second chance, to where somebody hasn't said, let me help you, or I know you need help, or somebody asking for help or something like that. I look at these students this way. I look at it as they're the ones that really, a lot of times I've never even asked for help because they didn't know it was there. They didn't know what they were doing was necessarily wrong because of the environment or the culture that they were brought up in or their circumstances, whatever it may be. By giving up on a kid, you're basically saying, you're not worth my time, you're not worth the effort, and you can go and do something else but don't be a burden on our society. That's not what we're talking about with these kids. These kids have had that aspect for a good portion of their lives. Not all of them, but a good majority of them, I would say. And so really it's giving the kid the opportunity of, okay, you messed up, but how do we go from there? Have you learned from that? How do we get your educational level, your experiences, your knowledge, your behavior, everything else into a nice little box to where you can say, I can now take these skills and I can go forward and be successful. If we as educators say that I'm just giving this to you one time, take it or leave it, then we are truly doing a disservice. And it's really looking at many different ways of how do you do it. There's not one, like I said before, there's not one way, there's not, and you really have to look at what is it that we can do for that individual kid while still making sure we're meeting all laws, all policies, all procedures, and all those sorts of things to where we don't put Jeffco schools in a bind, but we also don't put DYC in a bind, and we don't put ourselves in a bind. And sometimes that's difficult because you look at some of these kids and you feel for them, right? But you can't let those emotions take over. You have to maintain that level of respect versus trying to be their friend. And part of that is the accountability and knowing that even though, your situation may be difficult, may have been hard on you, you have choices. We're here to help you make those choices. When we give you all the knowledge and everything while you're with us, what you do with that is up to you. It's not up to me. It's not up to their parents. It's not up to the courts. It's up to them. And they need to take those choices and be able to look at it, what's in the best interest of myself, and then move forward from there.
I know when I was a teacher, go home and reflect on specific lessons or opportunities for kids. As an assistant principal or principal, you could measure pretty much on a daily basis if you'd been successful in terms of number of students you interacted with, or, obviously the ultimate as a high school principal is graduation for kids. One of the other things I really enjoyed was, years later, kids contacting me and saying, hey, you made a difference and you did this or this or this for me. I'm going to assume that you get that same opportunity. How do you define success for yourself and for your students?
Well, I'll start with the students first. Success for me for the students are ones that are able to go into the classroom, set aside the issues that they're dealing with, and be able to sit there and learn, and be able to take that knowledge and understanding and be able to articulate it in a manner that makes sense to them. And to where they're not always looking at, if every single thing I do, I'm going to get in trouble. Oh, you're the teacher, you're going to kick me out of class if I say this. That to me is success. If a kid can, and for some of these kids, if a kid can stay in class for 15, 20 minutes without having to leave, that's good for them. Others, we've instituted several programs to where a lot of kids are starting to look at, hey, if I actually stay in class and I do my work, I can have an incentive of my choice, something that I like, not something that the school principal or DYC decides is good for me, but I get to choose. Then I look at what's successful for the teachers as well. Success for me for the teachers is the teachers being able to go in, do their job with the flexibility that they need in order to adapt and overcome to the situations at that particular time, but yet still be able to feel as though they can ask any question that they want, that they can move forward, do the professional development that they need, get the training that they need, and then have a say in what happens. Obviously, there's some things that are non-negotiable, but in general sense, that they have a say in what is happening in the school. What are we doing? How are we doing certain things? For me, success is all of those things coming together and being able to do things like this podcast, right? To me, that is a success for me, that people are actually starting to pay attention to Mountain View and understand that it's not just this place that's in a corner that nobody knows about, that we're actually doing things to where kids are getting their education, they're getting their credit, that the teachers are successful, that they feel comfortable, that they're safe, that the kids, when they pass me in the hall or I have a meeting with them or whatever, and they're like, I appreciate you just talking to me. Thank you for letting me, air my feelings. And, a lot of them, they're like, oh, I'm sorry for cussing. In one-on-one meetings, it's like, I'm not here judging. So whatever you have to say, it's between you and me, you say it. I'm not telling them
right.
every other word or whatever.
That's right.
So for me, those are the successes. And then those kids that leave, they actually, we had a couple kids that just left this week that went around and actually told the teachers, thank you.
That's probably the ultimate.
Absolutely. And so I'm standing there and I'm watching these kids, and these kids came up and shook my head and said, thank you, Dr. Lee, which does not happen all the time.
That's special.
It is, and it's looking at that. And so for me, those are true successes. Those mean that at least those kids are starting to get it and understand, and that things are working in a cohesive manner to where it makes sense.
Any final thoughts for us?
Really, these kids, are really in a situation that's difficult. I wouldn't wish anybody to be in those situations, but it's a necessity. They're given opportunities, they're given chances, and we have a very good support structure in place. My achievement director is very supportive of what we're doing. There's other principals out there that I can go to. I can ask questions that are very supportive. Same thing with our teachers have a network of teachers that they go and they ask for. And so I don't think that when you're looking at education, without those pieces, we'd be able to do what we could do without the help and the support of everybody else around us. And so for me, it's very gratifying to know that people actually are concerned about that and that they take an interest in it, to where it actually allows me the opportunity to do my job. And, and I enjoy what I do. Otherwise, I wouldn't be here. And so, and I appreciate the opportunity of just being able to sit here across from you and have a conversation about what Mount View is and what we do, and that we are truly part of Jeffco. And the majority of our kids are Jeffco kids. They go right back into our schools.
Well, I just wanted you to know, very appreciative of the work that you and your staff do every single day, and recognize the challenges that you overcome to make sure that our kids get what they need. So I just wanted you to know, very appreciative of that work.
Thank you.
Please share that with your staff.
I will do that. They will.
That's all for this edition of Building Bright Futures. Our thanks to this week's guest, Dr. Chris Lee, and to our Warren Tech North digital audio engineers for their work on this episode. Look for new episodes twice a month on JPS-TV, Jeffco's official YouTube channel, and you can also search for us on iTunes. Please let me know if you have a podcast topic you'd like me to take on. I'd love to hear from you. See you next time.
This has been Building Bright Futures, a Jeffco podcast with Jeffco Superintendent Dan McMinimee. This is a production of Jeffco Public Schools.